The fact that you are here right now, encountering these words at this precise moment, is not something I would dismiss as mere coincidence. Something in you has been leaning toward this. Something in you has already begun to move. And that movement, that quiet, insistent pull towards something more authentic, is perhaps the most fundamentally human experience there is. Throughout my years studying what makes human beings truly flourish, I kept returning to a single, uncomfortable truth. Most people live far below their own ceiling. Not because they lack intelligence or warmth or creative capacity, but because somewhere in the course of growing up, the deepest layers of their psychological self were quietly, systematically sealed off. The mind, you see, is not a single room. It is a vast and layered architecture, level upon level of conscious awareness, personal memory, familial pattern, cultural inheritance, collective belief, and at the very bottom, something ancient and primal that most people never visit. That deepest layer does not hold your weaknesses. It holds your most essential self. And that self has been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for you to return to it. Think about what happened as you grew. You arrived in this world with an almost unbounded impulse toward growth. Curious, expressive, alive with possibility in every direction. And then life began to shape you, as it shapes everyone, with the particular tools available to it. Your family, with all their genuine love and all their unresolved fears, told you to be practical. Be realistic. Stop dreaming. Your schooling rewarded compliance and quietly penalized deviation. It taught you to stay within the system, to follow the rules, not to stand out in ways that disrupted the order. Your culture handed you a map of what was acceptable and what was not, who you were allowed to become and who you were not. And none of this was malicious. The people who shaped you were themselves shaped by the very same forces. They passed on what they had been given because it was all they knew. But the result, for so many of us, is that by the time we reach adulthood, we have learned to live inside a kind of invisible enclosure. Not a prison in any dramatic, visible sense, but a quietly enforced set of beliefs about who we are allowed to be, what is possible for us, and how much of ourselves we are permitted to express. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. Over the past week or so, you have likely been experiencing something subtle, but persistent. Perhaps a strange restlessness that you cannot quite name. Perhaps thoughts arriving more slowly than usual, or more rapidly. Perhaps a sense of forgetting something without being able to identify what. A feeling that something is slightly off, even when everything around you appears normal. These experiences are not signs of disorder. They are the early signals of psychological growth. The self beginning to press against the enclosure it has been living within. The organism is doing exactly what healthy organisms do. It is seeking more room. That restlessness is the first whisper. Maybe in recent days you found yourself asking, without quite meaning to, why you are here, what any of it is actually for. Maybe an old memory surfaced, an older version of yourself, and you wondered whether you were happier then, freer then, more genuinely yourself then. Maybe you noticed, with uncomfortable clarity, that your work doesn't satisfy you, or that a relationship isn't nourishing you, or that the life you're living doesn't feel entirely like yours. These are not random intrusions. These are the first cracks in the conditioning. Your own deepest intelligence is whispering to you, wake up, look clearly. Something truer than this is available to you. The discomfort that follows is the second stage, and it is equally important. There is a psychological phenomenon I find endlessly significant. The moment a person begins to individuate, to differentiate themselves from the social and familial mold they were formed inside, they encounter genuine anxiety. The conditioned self resists. It has kept you safe after all. It knows the rules. It has learned the precise behavior required to remain accepted, to avoid rejection, to maintain the familiar. And the need to belong is real and profound. I have always maintained that. But there is a need that sits even deeper than belonging, and that is the need to become what you are actually capable of becoming. When these two needs come into tension, the friction is intense. And in the middle of that friction, a kind of paralysis can set in. The ego, sensing a threat to its established structure, sounds the alarm. Stop, don't change, this is dangerous. But the deeper self, the part of you that is oriented toward growth, toward authenticity, toward full expression, says something entirely different. Keep going. This is exactly right. The time has come. And here, in that tension, a choice presents itself. You can quiet the discomfort. You can tell yourself that everything is fine, that nothing needs to change, that the restlessness was nothing. The conditioned structures will settle back into place. Life will resume its familiar shape. But the opportunity, and I use that word with great seriousness, will have passed. Or you can lean into the discomfort. You can say with genuine openness, I'm listening. What is it that I need to understand? And in that moment of honest receptivity, something real begins to shift. What we lock away when we suppress this process is remarkable in its scope. Creativity is sealed off first, because it is the most threatening to the social order. That spontaneous, generative impulse that children express so naturally before they learn that it makes adults uncomfortable. Then authenticity, the sense of a genuine, stable inner self beneath all the roles we have learned to perform. And finally, agency, the lived experience of being the actual author of your own life, rather than a competent performer in someone else's narrative. When these three capacities are suppressed, a person can function quite adequately by almost every external measure. They can hold jobs, maintain relationships, meet their obligations, but they carry a quiet hollowness, a persistent sense that something fundamental is absent, even when they cannot name what it is. And I want to say something important here. Do not direct anger at the people who shaped these limitations in you. They were working from inside their own enclosures. The conditioning was done to them long before they passed it along to you. They accepted their boundaries as the natural shape of reality because no one ever showed them otherwise. What we are engaged in here, this conversation, this moment of reflection, is something different. It is the project of helping people find their way back to themselves, and that project requires us all to move forward together rather than backward into blame. There is an image I return to often. Inside each person, buried beneath the accumulated weight of conditioning, social performance, and self-protective habit, there is something of genuine value, something original and alive and specifically yours. From the outside, after years of neglect, it may no longer look like what it is. It may look dull, unremarkable, indistinguishable from the ordinary, but its nature has not changed. It simply needs attention. It needs to be recognized, tended to, allowed to surface. The question is whether you will give it that attention or whether you will continue to walk past it every day without stopping. I have spoken to many people about what holds them back from this work, and the answer is almost always some version of the same thing. They are waiting for the right moment, the right conditions, the right level of readiness. But I have observed something consistently across decades of studying human growth. The readiness doesn't come before the engagement. The readiness develops through the engagement. You do not wait until you feel ready to begin living more authentically. You begin, however tentatively, and the capacity grows in the doing of it. Now I want to offer you something concrete. Not a mystical ritual, but a genuine psychological practice grounded in what we know about how the mind processes and integrates suppressed experience. Find a quiet place. Sit with yourself. Allow your breathing to slow and deepen. And then, imaginatively, allow yourself to descend into the part of yourself you have been avoiding. Ask what you find there. What you will most likely encounter is fear. The fear of being inadequate. The fear of being unlovable. The fear that without your protective structures you will not be safe. These fears are real, and they deserve to be met with genuine compassion rather than contempt. What has been guarding you all these years, however limiting its methods, was trying to protect something valuable. Acknowledge that. Thank it honestly. And then, with equal honesty, let it know that you are capable of something more open now. That the protection served its purpose, but the time for a different way of being has arrived. The experience of doing this kind of inner work, and I say this based on extensive observation, not on wishful thinking, produces something unmistakable. There is a quality of lightness that follows honest self-encounter, a clarity, a sense of having put something down that you had been carrying for a very long time without fully realizing it. It is not dramatic. It is quiet, but it is real. What comes after this initial encounter is, in many ways, the more demanding part of the work, because the world around you will not automatically reorganize itself to support your growth. The people closest to you may notice you changing and feel genuinely unsettled by it. A person beginning to live from a more authentic center speaks differently, chooses differently, responds differently. And those who have known only the conditioned version may experience this as a kind of loss, or even a threat. Your family may say that you've changed, that you're not yourself, that something has gone wrong with you. Your friends may say they preferred who you were before. Your colleagues may wonder if you still fit. And the pain of that response is real. Rejection is among the most psychologically difficult experiences we face as social creatures. But I would ask you to consider something. The loneliness of being misunderstood by others, while painful, is categorically different from, and less damaging than, the loneliness of being estranged from yourself. When you are genuinely present to your own inner life, you are never entirely alone, regardless of what surrounds you. Your own mind will mount its own resistance as well, and it will do so with considerable sophistication. It will produce doubt. Perhaps this is just a phase. Perhaps you are being foolish. Perhaps the old life was better than you remember it. It will produce fear. If you change, you may lose everything. Your security, your relationships, the life you've built. It will produce guilt. Who are you to put your own needs at the center? How dare you prioritize your own growth when others depend on you? These voices are not the voice of truth. They are the voice of the conditioned self, fighting for its survival. If you learn to recognize them as such, to hear them without automatically obeying them, you have achieved something of genuine psychological significance. And then there is what I might call the collective weight of shared belief. The enormous, largely invisible pressure exerted by the cultural and social environment on anyone who attempts to step outside its established patterns. When you begin to change, that environment pushes back. Sometimes this manifests as practical difficulties, financial strain, relational tension, professional friction. It would be a mistake to interpret these difficulties as evidence that growth is wrong or dangerous. They are simply the friction generated by any real change meeting an established order. The capacity to hold steady through that friction, to maintain your orientation toward growth while navigating real-world complexity, is one of the most important psychological skills a human being can develop. I want to speak particularly about two vulnerable moments in this process, because I have seen people undone by both of them. The first is the intoxication of early awakening. When a person first genuinely contacts their suppressed authentic self, the energy release can be extraordinary. They feel suddenly powerful, clear, capable of anything, and the temptation in that state is to make sweeping, immediate changes, to leave the job, end the relationship, overturn the entire structure of the life. I would urge great caution here. Genuine transformation is not reactive, it is deliberate. In the early days of this process, the most valuable thing you can do is not act, but observe. Gather information about who you actually are beneath the conditioning. Let the picture clarify before you make decisions that will be difficult to reverse. The second vulnerable moment arrives somewhere between 10 days and 2 weeks into sustained inner work. The initial energy has subsided. The clarity hasn't fully stabilized yet. You are tired, and the old life begins to look, in retrospect, more comfortable and more reasonable than it actually was. Maybe I was exaggerating, you think. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't so bad. This is the most critical juncture in the entire process. It is precisely here that most people turn back. And if you can recognize this moment for what it is, not a revelation that the old life was fine after all, but a predictable stage in the mechanics of psychological change, and hold your course through it, what waits on the other side is a more stable, more integrated sense of self than anything you have experienced before. One practice I find genuinely useful at this juncture is what I might call a letter of conscious farewell. Take paper and write to the older version of yourself, to the self that operated within the enclosure, that accepted the conditioning, that played the roles assigned to it. Write with real gratitude. That self was doing its best. It navigated real difficulties with the tools available to it. It got you to this moment. But then, with equal honesty, say goodbye. Acknowledge that its strategies belong to a chapter that is ending. The act of writing this is not theatrical performance. It is a genuine psychological event, an act of deliberate differentiation that the mind registers as meaningful. Some people find it valuable to destroy the letter afterward, as a physical embodiment of release. The particulars matter less than the honesty of the writing itself. As this process matures, and it does mature, if you allow it, something shifts in the actual texture of daily experience. You begin to notice what I have elsewhere called peak experiences more frequently, those moments of full presence in which you feel entirely yourself, entirely alive, entirely connected to what is happening around you. You find that certain relationships deepen while others naturally fall away. Not with drama or rupture, but with quiet inevitability, because the frequency of genuine connection has changed. New interests arise that feel not like hobbies or distractions, but like authentic callings. Things that seem to draw on something real in you rather than merely entertaining the surface. An impulse to learn an instrument, to study a language, to explore a form of making or creating that you had long ago suppressed. These are worth following. They are not whims. They are signals from the parts of you that have been waiting for permission to exist. Old pleasures that once numbed or distracted you may begin to lose their appeal. Things you used to watch or consume or pursue for relief may begin to feel hollow. This is not depression. This is not loss. This is the organism outgrowing mechanisms that were serving a compensatory function. When you no longer need the numbing stops being satisfying. This is healthy. And underneath all of it, even when the surface of your life remains turbulent and uncertain, something begins to stabilize at a deeper level. A quality of inner steadiness that is not indifference and not resignation, but genuine groundedness. A reduced compulsion to control every outcome. A diminished urgency to manage other people's perceptions of you. A felt sense of existing, at last, on your own terms. This is what full humanness looks like in practice. Not the elimination of difficulty or suffering, but the presence of an integrated self moving through difficulty with clarity and purpose. I have spent the better part of my life arguing against the assumption, so common in psychology, that human beings are primarily driven by pathology and deficiency, that what we most need is to manage our symptoms and reduce our pain. I believe something more generous than that about human nature. I believe that beneath the neuroses and the conditioned fears and the survival adaptations, there is a genuine, healthy, growth-oriented core that will move toward flourishing if given even the most minimal conditions for doing so. That core is in you. It has always been in you. The work, and it is real work, I will not pretend otherwise, is simply to clear enough space for it to be heard. Every morning, from this point forward, I would ask you to pause before the day begins and ask yourself a single honest question. Who am I living for today? Am I moving through this day in service of what others expect of me, what I imagine will be approved of, what keeps things comfortable and familiar? Or am I moving through this day in genuine service of my own deepest becoming? That is not a question with a single correct answer that once found never needs asking again. It is a question that must be renewed each day because the pull of the conditioned self is persistent and patient, but the asking of it, daily, honestly, with real willingness to hear the answer, is itself a form of practice. It keeps the orientation alive. And I want to address one potential misunderstanding directly. There is a kind of self-absorption, a narrowing of concern down to one's own feelings and preferences and desires that I would never advocate for. That is not what I mean by authentic self-actualization. What I mean is something almost opposite. When a person achieves genuine integration, when they are no longer performing a self but actually being one, they do not become less available to the world. They become more available. Their care for others becomes less driven by guilt or obligation and more freely given. Their presence becomes a resource rather than a drain. Their authenticity functions, in ways both subtle and direct, as a kind of permission for those around them to be more fully themselves. The most generous thing you can do for the people in your life is not to make yourself smaller in service of their comfort, but to make yourself more fully real. The world has more than enough people who are skilled at fitting in. What it genuinely needs are people who have found the courage to be real. You are standing at one of those junctures that life occasionally offers. A moment of genuine choice about the direction of your psychological development. The path toward greater authenticity and fuller expression of your own potential is not an easy one. I would never claim otherwise. There will be friction and resistance and moments of doubt that feel overwhelming, but I have seen, again and again, what becomes possible for people who choose to walk it anyway. And I would say to you, with all the conviction I can honestly offer, it is worth it. Not because it leads to some final state of perfect happiness, but because the alternative, a life lived below your own ceiling, inside an enclosure you never examined, performing a self that was always someone else's construction, is a genuine waste of the one existence you have been given. You are capable of more than that. The question, as it has always been, is simply whether you are willing to find out how much more.